back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am beginning a vlog for Victober. In case you haven't already heard me say it like a million times within the past month or two, Victober is my favorite readathon that happens in the entire year because I love Victorian literature. So any opportunity to pick up more Victorian literature is definitely a plus. I'm actually starting this vlog a little bit early, so you may have seen my October TBR, which has like a whole bunch of Victorian books that I hope to get to, and we'll see whether or not I get to all of them. But I am starting this vlog a little bit early because it is the last week of September, but I'm starting a Victorian book and I want to share that with you as well, and that is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I have read before, but it's been a few years since I read it. I'm currently teaching a British literature class to my homeschool co-op, and this is the book that we're going to be reading on October, so I want to get a jump start on it so that way I can prepare like my lecture notes and discussion questions and class projects and all that kind of stuff, and I'm not doing it last minute while trying to finish the book. So I'm really looking forward to talking about Jekyll and Hyde and sharing my reading experience of this with you along with the other books that I read for Victober. I'm back. I finished Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's now October 2nd, so Victober 2nd. I did finish this in September, but it was at the very end of September, and I loved it probably even more than the first time that I read it because I'm digging deeper, because I am talking to a class about it. So I want to have more information and more in-depth thoughts, and I really love it, but I wish it was something that wasn't so obviously portrayed in media everywhere, because it's one of those things where if you didn't know the ending, you would be blown away. Like, I'm sure that when this came out, people were like, oh my gosh, that was what was happening all along. But because you see Jekyll and Hyde literally everywhere depicted in like everything, I feel like everyone knows the ending. I read that it was actually inspired by a dream Robert Louis Stevenson had, and he wanted to write a bogey tale, but his wife insisted that he put some more depth in it and just delve into human nature and more like kind of like philosophical things and add some depth to it. And I'm glad that she did. I think it would have been good even just as simply a straight up bogey tale, but there is more that's happening here, more description of like the duality of human nature and hypocrisy, and the imagery is so vivid. It's so good. So now that I have finished that, I am currently reading two things for Victober. So first of all, I started Poor Miss Finch by Wilkie Collins. I'm only 2 chapters in, but I'm really liking it. I feel like our narrator has a really strong voice and I really like it. She's really quirky and her observations are really funny. So she is a widow and doesn't really have a whole lot that she can do for herself, and so she ends up advertising herself in the newspaper as a music teacher. She gets hired by a family in like the middle of nowhere, this little tiny hamlet, and she is going to be not really a music instructor, sort of, I guess, for this girl who is blind. So she's going to play these classics and these greats for this girl, and this girl is going to try to like replicate it note by note, and she loves music. And all we really know about her so far is that she's blind and that she is like the product of a first marriage, and she's the only child from the first marriage, and the father has remarried and has quite a few children with his second wife, and she stays by herself, like off somewhere else in this place where they live, and isn't really mingling with the family. And that's really all I know. Since I've only read 2 chapters, I haven't even met Miss Finch yet. I have only met like some of the servants, and our narrator is coming to the house as as I am reading. So I'll definitely update you more about that, but so far just really liking the tone. I'm also about a third or a quarter of the way through Anthony Trollope's The Belton Estate. So this I'm actually doing a full like spoilery vlog on my Patreon for, so if that's something that interests you, you can head over there and check that out. But it was recommended to me by 3 people who raved about it last year, and so I'm really excited to read it because I kind of have an iffy history with Anthony Trollope, and that I feel like I should love him, that there's so many things that I love about his writing. He's really funny, he's really pithy, and I really like his commentary on society, but I always feel like his books feel too long. Even if they're not long, they feel so long to me and so drawn out. And I don't know why that is. I can't put my finger on it, but I also don't really usually feel very connected to the characters. So I'm really hoping that I have a better experience with the Belton Estate. So far, I'm enjoying it, but not like super invested in it. We're following an older girl named Clara. I say girl because she's still like unmarried. I think she's in her 20s. So she's not super old, but she is past like the normal point of marriage, I guess. And circumstances have happened to where the family estate has to pass to a male heir, and her brother's passed away, so it's going to pass to her cousin. And then she has an aunt that is really invested in her and really likes her and cares for her. And they're hoping that maybe she'll leave some of her money to Clara, so Clara will be provided for. But they find out that the aunt is actually leaving all her money to her nephew, who she prefers over Clara. So there's a cousin that's inheriting the estate, and then there's a cousin that's inheriting the aunt's money. And so there's kind of like this love triangle thing happening where it's like, who's she gonna end up with? It already feels like there's a decent amount of drama and we're not that far in. So I'm kind of wondering like, okay, where are we going? There's still so much of the book left, and that it feels like something has already happened that like feels like the direction the story's going in, but there's still so much of it left. So I don't really know. Anyways, that's my little Victober update, and I will check in soon and let you know what I'm reading. Let's chat. It's been a while since I have last updated you. My cat is over here deciding she's gonna take a bath, so hopefully that doesn't make too much noise, but I wanted to check in and let you know how my reading was going. So first of all, I did finish The Belton Estate by Anthony Trollope. I listened to pretty much the entire thing on audiobook, and I actually think I highly recommend it on audiobook. My narrator was Flo Gibson, and I thought she did a really good job because I noticed when I went into my Kindle, I was going to like look for a quote to talk about because I shared this on my Patreon vlog. And when I was going through and looking at the dialogue is like a very like back and forth with no indication of like, this is what people's expressions look like when they're speaking, or even indicating who is speaking. Like once they've gotten through the preliminary like first couple of paragraphs, it looks like Trollope just has like dialogue back and forth with nothing else in there. And I think that I wouldn't have enjoyed that as much, and I might have even found myself drifting a little bit and like losing track of who was speaking. But because it was on audio, that wasn't an issue. This book was kind of middle of the road for me, which is common with a Trollope. I liked it better than Barchester Towers, and not quite as much as The Warden, I don't think. It was close to The Warden, I guess, but I liked the characters in The Warden better than I liked the characters in The Belton Estate. I just didn't feel very invested in what was going on in the story at all. It was fine, but I didn't really care about what happened to any of the characters. There were moments of humor, there were moments that felt a bit like a Jane Austen novel, and I really like enjoyed that. I found myself a little annoyed with the main character and her indecisiveness and her inability to know her own mind and yet expect the men around her to understand what she was thinking. It's almost like she expected them to read her mind and her feelings, but it seemed like she wasn't even quite aware of what her own feelings were. So there were moments where I was annoyed with her, but also moments where I really liked her because she ends up standing up for a friend that has a bit of a scandal in her past, and I really appreciated Clara's loyalty in this. But overall, I just kind of left with middling thoughts that it wasn't bad, but it also wasn't good. So an author who I do love, who I think is kind of a controversial author and not everyone does love, but I love his writing, I sink right into it, is Thomas Hardy. So I am reading The Trumpet-Major right now. I'm mostly listening to it on audio, but I have done some reading on Kindle because I have it on Kindle as well, and I've gone back and highlighted things that I really love because, oh my gosh, his writing is so beautiful. So just an example from just the first chapter says, on a fine summer morning when the leaves were warm under the sun and the more industrious bees abroad diving into every blue and red cup that could possibly be considered a flower, Anne was sitting at the back window of her mother's portion of the house. I just love the descriptions. I just think that they're so beautiful, and I just sink into Hardy's writing, feel such a strong sense of place and the sense of nature, and I just love it. So essentially the story of the Trumpet-Major, from what I've heard, it's not nearly as dramatic and tragic as most of Hardy's works are. It's actually a historical fiction set during the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and we're following a girl named Anne and her mother, who is a widow. They're living in this town. I think they're living in a house that like the miller owns. There is a man that Anne has loved as she is growing up, and she still has feelings for him, but he has gone on to other places doing other things, and then she has two young men who are interested in her. So there's essentially like a love square here, which kind of reminds me of Far from the Madding Crowd. I don't know where we're going with this, if it's going to end up being as tragic, but I am currently 45% of the way through. I'm kind of like flying through it because I am enjoying it so much. It is so wonderful. I am now halfway through Poor Miss Finch. I am reading this one entirely physically, which is nice because the other two that I just talked about were audiobooks. And I'm still really enjoying it, but this feels like it's much more slow moving than a lot of other Wilkie Collins that I read, in that now halfway through, we're finally kind of like coming to the point of some of the drama. She ends up meeting this man who she falls in love with, who is a twin, and there's just kind of some drama of things that happen in terms of like some things happen with him physically that she's unable to see, that he's worried will cause her to no longer love him or want to marry him, and so he's not been honest and forthright with her about what's happening to him. The thing that I love the most about this book is the humor. I feel like the narrator is so funny, and I feel like there's a lot of really funny characters in this. I especially love Lucilla's father and stepmother in terms of funny. Like, they're really kind of irritating characters as well, especially the stepmother, but the way that they're written is so it's more funny than it is annoying. I feel like maybe people might not love this as much because it so far doesn't feel as like mysterious or sensationalist as other Wilkie Collins that I've read, but we're halfway through and it's like I feel like it's starting to pick up the pace, and so I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the slow beginnings and kind of getting to know where we are, so still really loving this. I guess I forgot to bring it in with me, but I also started Dickensland, and that actually I've only listened to on audio as well. It's a nonfiction about Dickens London, and I like it so far. It's kind of not what I expected. I thought that we were going to get some more background information on Dickens' life, and maybe that's gonna like be interspersed throughout, but so far they've been talking about London kind of almost as like a tourist location because of Dickens' work and the staying power that they have. They're mostly still focused in the past when either Dickens was alive or shortly after he died, and how basically the way that Dickens wrote about London caused different locations in London to become like a literary tourist place of interest, and that wasn't as common before. So we've kind of gone through like traveling inns and stuff like that, specific ones that say like were mentioned in Dickens novels or that Dickens had stayed at, and so they say it's like inspiration for places, especially like the Pickwick Papers was mentioned a lot in that one. And then another chapter that I read was all about like the graveyards and how shoddy burials were like within the city, and how there was like this miasma that was like going through the streets and was like really disgusting, of like rotting flesh and the bacteria and like the health dangers of that, and how that's portrayed in Bleak House. So it's kind of like going back and forth between his works and then like areas that he gained inspiration from that then became a place that people wanted to go visit and all that kind of stuff. So there hasn't been that much about Dickens' actual life yet. I think that's it for now. I did start Food of the Gods by H.G. Wells, but I'm only like one chapter into it, and I kind of like don't have like the mental bandwidth to focus on it right now because I'm reading Poor Miss Finch and the Trumpet-Major, and so I kind of like want to finish one of those before I pick Food of the Gods back up again. But that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I will chat more with you later. It has been a little while since I've updated you, and I've had a haircut since I've done an update. So sorry for the jump scare of like intense loss of hair halfway through this vlog. Anyways, I have a little bit of free time in between a scheduled haircut and then I am going to a book club meeting. So I am just sitting here because there's no point in going home. Home is too far away for me to just turn around and come right back. So I'm kind of hanging out, doing some errands, that kind of stuff, but I have some extra time, so I thought I would come on and update you. I finished several of the books that I talked to you about last time. One of which is The Trumpet-Major by Thomas Hardy, and oh man, I was really loving that book so much. So beautifully written. I didn't hate most of the characters. It ends up kind of being like a love square, which I think I mentioned before, and one of the characters is like kind of over the top ridiculous, and he just reminds me of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and that was actually fun because I thought he was really funny and I just enjoyed laughing at him, although he kind of does some like villainous gross stuff as well, but not as hateable as some characters in books that I've read. So I was just enjoying it. Thought the writing was beautiful, was really interested in seeing where the story was gonna go. Unfortunately, it just derailed a little bit for me at the end. I was thinking this was gonna be my first Victober 5-star book, and it just wasn't. I really wish that it was, but there are things that happen in the last couple chapters of this book that make me feel like, why did we even go through all of this? Like, there's so much drama and tension, and for what is what it feels like at the end. And I didn't like the way that the story resolved, but I enjoyed almost all of reading it except for like the last 2 or 3 chapters. So it's still like a really solid 4-star for me, and it still falls in the category of Hardy books that I really enjoyed. I also finished Poor Miss Finch by Wilkie Collins, and I thought that was gonna be a perfect 5-star read, and it just wasn't, unfortunately. It was really close. I just felt like it kind of like dragged in places and got a little old because we just have a lot of back and forth that's happening in the middle of the book that I feel like didn't need to be there. I think that the book could have been 100 pages less and it would have been nearly perfect. I do want to say that I don't think it was overly sensational. There was drama, there were things happening where you're like, where are we going with this? But it was not like, do not prepare yourself for something like The Law and the Lady and The Moonstone and The Woman in White, because it's not very detective-y and it's definitely not sensational like a lot of his. And I think what saved it for me was how funny it is. There are like some redeeming characters in here that are really humorous, and that breaks up the rest of the story for me, because otherwise I think that this whole thing would have just felt like this weird melodramatic love triangle situation that was just kind of meh, and it doesn't really get like super, like I said, like suspenseful or sensational until towards the end. There's like the last maybe like 5th of the book or something, it picks up a bit more and you're like, what is happening right now? And so there are moments of like tension and moments of like not knowing what's going to happen next, but it's just like, in terms of sensationalism, it's not on par with the other Wilkie Collins that I have read. But I think that if you're okay with that, if you just want kind of like a dramatic story with some humor in it, I think you'll really like Poor Miss Finch, because I actually really enjoyed it. I'm throwing out there that it's not a sensational story because I think I could see people getting really disappointed with it because of that, but I wasn't. I haven't picked up Dickensland again. I plan to, but I just have other things I'm listening to right now. Right now my primary audiobook is Three Men on the Bummel, which is the sequel to Three Men in a Boat, which I read last October and really enjoyed. And I am reading this again with Rainey and Dia, who I read Three Men in a Boat with, and unfortunately I am not liking this one at all. I don't know if it's just my mood or what. There are moments of it that are funny, and but by moments I mean there's some one-liners that I've enjoyed, but most of it I haven't thought is funny at all, and it feels like pulling teeth to listen to it. I am bored listening to it most of the time, which is so weird given how much I love the first book. And I feel like the vibes are very similar, the tone is very similar, the humor is really similar, so I kind of almost feel like it's maybe right book, wrong time. I mean, other people that I'm talking to reading it, they're not enjoying it as much as Three Men in a Boat, I think, but they're still enjoying it more than I am and finding lots of humor and things to make them giggle. And for the most part, I just don't care. I'm just ready for it to be over. I'm about halfway through and I'm just trying to get through it. I just am not enjoying it, and I feel like it's me, and it's very unfortunate. So in this one we have the same characters that we had in the first book, and in the first book they decide they're going to go on an adventure. They need to get away from it all, and they go on this boat down the river and they have no clue what they're doing. In this case they're going on a trip, a bicycling trip through the Black Forest in Germany, which is so random. And so there are moments that are really funny, but I'm not finding most of the anecdotes or most of their shenanigans to be that funny so far. I mean that might change, I suppose, but I don't know. I also am really missing Montmorency. Montmorency is the dog, and he was a great character in the first book, my favorite character for sure, and he's not there. We don't have him, so I'm wondering if that's kind of my issue as well. I also am reading Food of the Gods by H.G. Wells. In fact, I don't know if I updated you telling you that I had read one chapter of it and that's all I had read. So I'm gonna pick that up again because that's kind of my last Victorian read, because I've actually gotten through a lot of Victorian books. I'm very pleased with how much I have read this Victober, probably more than normal, and I'm super pumped about that. So I have that, and that's probably going to be my last book, and I don't know if I'm going to finish it by the end of this vlog or not, but I will hopefully be back with one more update before Victober is over. Actually November 1st now, so it feels like it is time to wrap this Victober vlog up. When last I left you, I still had 3 books that I was in the progress of, and I only finished one of them, and that's okay. So I didn't finish Dickensland, which I already mentioned I probably would not. I'm actually continuing that into Nonfiction November, which is going to dovetail perfectly into my British literature class because we're doing A Christmas Carol in December. So feels like some pre-reading for that class a little bit. And then I did not quite finish The Food of the Gods. As you can see, I got kind of close. I'm probably at least 75% of the way through, maybe a little bit more. Let me tell you about this book because I had only read the last chapter the last time I talked to you. So it is about a couple of men who get together and they want to create this food that gives exponential growth to whatever it's given to. So they create this stuff and they have a test farm with chicks, and they try a bunch of stuff and finally chicks hatch and they are absolutely humongous. Of course, the scientists are thrilled. They hired these people called Mr. and Mrs. Skinner, and they are really hilarious, and they're not particularly clean people, and as a result they did not keep a tight lid on the Food of the Gods, which I think is called Heracleophobia the 4. It was their 4th variation. Needless to say, it got out, and it started with like, there were like vines that were growing bigger and growing all around the house. And then we find out that wasps got into it, and there's a description here that is like kind of horrifying. It actually ended up being more intense in this part than I expected. So it says that it made a drone like a motor car, and it was as big or bigger than a barn owl, and it starts attacking someone and he shoots them and kills it. And it says when he came to measure the thing, he found it was 27.5 inches long across its open wings, and its sting was 3 inches long. The abdomen was blown clean off its body, but he estimated the length of the creature from head to sting at 18 inches. At which, then it talks about people getting stung and they die because those stingers are so big. And then we find out that rats got into it, and rats are now like the size of horses. They're chasing people down and eating them and just like all this stuff, and it's like kind of horrifying. It's like more intense than I thought it was going to be. And then they find a way to kind of like try to resolve that. It's like this book is split up and it feels kind of episodic, even though each like follows the other one. So that first section I found utterly fascinating, and we find out, I think towards the end of that section or something like that, that one of the scientists had a baby that kind of had like failure to thrive and wasn't growing like he should, so he gave a little bit of it to the baby, and the baby gained some weight, and that was all well and good, except that once you give a living creature this substance, they continue to require it as they continue to grow, and they'll literally like suffer and die. It's like almost like this addiction to this substance. But if you give it to something that's full grown, like an adult, it won't have any effect on them at all because they're already done growing. So he's required to continue to give this to his baby, and there's someone else that they're associated with who are like, well, I don't want your son to be alone, so let's try it on my sons too. So now there are 4 babies, 4 boys, and they're all taking this stuff, and they're all absolutely humongous. Like the baby, by the time he's like just starting to toddle and walk around, is already 5'5". So there's like the estimate that he's going to be like 36 feet tall or something when he's full grown. I don't know, because I haven't gotten to any of them being full grown. But then, you know, we move on to all the information about the babies and the children, and it became less interesting to me at that point. Started not enjoying it as much, and it's kind of a chore to get through the chapters. So since it's November 1st, I'm setting it aside for now. Is it like a full DNF? Not necessarily. I might still pick it up, but I had a bunch of buddy reads that were starting on November 1st. So I'm just like I was really having a hard time reading it. Ever since we moved away from it being about animals, was when it felt like really tense and really scary. And you'd think it would feel more tense and scary being about children, but the children aren't mean. They don't have like these primal instincts trying to attack people. So even though in a way it is higher stakes, it doesn't feel that way in the book. Okay, so the last book, the one that I did finish, is 3 Men on the Bummel by Jerome K. Jerome. Mentioned it in my last update. My feelings have not changed, so that's a really brief update. I really struggled almost the whole way through this book. At the very beginning, when they're talking about going on this trip and they're making plans, they have interactions with their wives, trying to like talk them into letting them going, but the wives are actually like, you know, we really need a break. It would be great if you would leave. And that section was really funny. And then when they're preparing for their trip, there's an anecdote where they flash back to the past, and it's about like this guy trying to help our narrator fix a bicycle, and that anecdote was funny. And then like the rest of the book, like there was a few one-liners that I thought was funny, but most of it I just didn't find funny at all. And I don't know, like I couldn't settle into the story like I could with the first one, which is a weird thing to say because they hop back and forth a lot. So we'll start with, you know, this is what we're doing, but that reminds me of a time when, and so it is like really broken up anyway. But I didn't have an issue feeling like I was getting into it in the first book. So this book just, I don't know, maybe it was my mood, I have no idea. But reading it with Dee and Rainey, neither of them like loved it either. They liked it more than I did. I ended up like I have like 2-star feelings about this book, and that feels like kind of unfair because I feel like I should like it, but I just really was so bored and didn't find most of it funny. So on that dud of an ending, Victober is over. I'm okay with the fact that I didn't finish 2 books, especially because they're both soft DNFs. Well, one is fully continuing right now, but like Food of the Gods is a soft DNF. I would still like to finish it by the end of the year. But, you know, I read a lot of books this Victober that I really enjoyed. I did not have like a big 5-star new all-time favorite like I was kind of hoping that I would. But that's okay. Like, I still really enjoyed quite a few of the books that I read and had like a few 4 stars that were really close to 5 stars. So it was a really enjoyable reading month. Hope you enjoyed this journey and coming along with me. If you participated in Victober, would love to hear what you ended up reading, and if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this vlog, of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again